George Lansbury, PC, was a British politician and social reformer who led the Labour Party from 1932 to 1935. Apart from a brief period of ministerial office during the Labour government of 1929 to 31, he spent his political life campaigning against established authority and vested interests, his main causes being the promotion of social justice, women's rights and world disarmament. Originally a radical liberal, Lansbury converted to socialism in the early 1890s, and thereafter served his local community in the East End of London in numerous elective offices. His activities were underpinned by his Christian beliefs which, except for a short period of doubt, sustained him through his life. Elected to Parliament in 1910, he resigned his seat in 1912 to campaign for women's suffrage, and was briefly imprisoned after publicly supporting militant action. In 1912 Lansbury helped to establish the Daily Herald newspaper and became its editor. Throughout the First World War the paper maintained a strongly pacifist stance and supported the October 1917 Russian Revolution. These positions contributed to Lansbury's failure to be elected to Parliament in 1918. He devoted himself to local politics in his home borough of Poplar, and went to prison with 30 fellow councillors for his part in the Poplar Raids Revolt of 1921. After his return to Parliament in 1922, Lansbury was denied office in the brief Labour government of 1924, although he served as First Commissioner of Works in the Labour government of 1929 to 31. After the political and economic crisis of August 1931, Lansbury did not follow his leader, Ramsay MacDonald, into the national government, but stayed with the Labour Party. As the most senior of the small contingent of Labour MPs that survived the 1931 general election, Lansbury became the party's leader. His pacifism and his opposition to rearmament in the face of rising European fascism put him at odds with his party, and when his position was rejected at the 1935 party conference he resigned the leadership. He spent his final years traveling through the United States and Europe in the cause of peace and disarmament. Early life. East End upbringing. George Lansbury was born in Halesworth in the county of Suffolk on the 22nd of February 1859. He was the third of 9 children born to a railway worker, also named George Lansbury, and Anne and Acute Ferris. George Sr.'s job involved the supervision of railway construction gangs. The family was often on the move, and living conditions were primitive. Through his progressive-minded mother and grandmother, young George became familiar with the names of great contemporary reformers, Gladstone, Richard Cobden and John Bright, and began to read the radical Reynolds's newspaper. By the end of 1868 the family had moved into London's East End, the district in which Lansbury would live and work for almost all his life. The essayist Ronald Blythe has described the East End of the 1860s and 1870s as stridently English. The smoke-blackened streets were packed with a literate multitude stayed alive through sheer bird-like ebullience. Interspersed with spells of work, Lansbury attended schools in Bethnal Green and Whitechapel. He then held a succession of manual jobs, including work as a coaling contractor in partnership with his elder brother, James, loading and unloading coal wagons. This was heavy and dangerous work, and led to at least one near-fatal accident. During his adolescence and early manhood, Lansbury was a regular attender at the public gallery at the House of Commons, where he heard and remembered many of Gladstone's speeches on the main foreign policy issue of the day, the Eastern Question. He was present at the riots which erupted outside Gladstone's house on the 24th of February 1878 after a peace meeting in Hyde Park. Shepherd writes that Gladstone's liberal liberalism, proclaiming liberty, freedom and community interests, was a heady mix that left an indelible mark on the youthful Lansbury. George Lansbury Sr. died in 1875. That year young George met 14-year-old Elizabeth Brine, whose father Isaac Brine owned a local sawmill. The couple eventually married in 1880, at Whitechapel Parish Church, where the vicar, J. Franklin Kitto, had been Lansbury's spiritual guide and counselor. Apart from a period of doubt in the 1890s when he temporarily rejected the church, Lansbury remained a staunch Anglican until his death. Australia in 1881. The first of Lansbury's 12 children, Bessie, was born. Another daughter, Annie, followed in 1882. Seeking to improve his family's prospects, Lansbury decided that the best hopes of prosperity lay in emigrating to Australia. The London Agent General for Queensland depicted a land of boundless opportunities with work for all. Seduced by this appeal, Lansbury and Bessie raised the necessary passage money, and in May 1884 set sail with their children for Brisbane. On the outward passage the family experienced illness, discomfort and danger. On one occasion the ship came close to foundering during a monsoon. On arrival at Brisbane in July 1884, Lansbury found that contrary to the London agent's promises, there was a superfluity of labour and work was hard to find. His first job, breaking stone, proved to be too physically punishing. He moved to a better paid position as a van driver, but was sacked when, for religious reasons, he refused to work on Sundays. He then contracted to work on a farm some 80 miles inland, to find on arrival that his employer had misled him about living conditions and terms of employment. For several months the family lived in extreme squalor before Lansbury secured release from the contract. Back in Brisbane, he worked for a while at the newly built Brisbane cricket ground. As a keen follower of the game, he hoped to see the visiting English touring team play, but, as Lansbury's biographer Raymond Postgate records, he learned that cricket watching was not a pleasure for workmen. Throughout his time in Australia, Lansbury sent letters home, revealing the truth about conditions facing immigrants. To a friend he wrote in March 1885, "Mechanics are not wanted. Farm labourers are not wanted. Hundreds of men and women are not able to get work. The streets are foul day and night, and if I had a sister I would shoot her dead rather than see her brought out of this little hell on earth." In May 1885, having received from Isaac Brine sufficient funds for a passage home, the Lansburys left Australia for good. Radical liberal. First campaigns. On his return to London, Lansbury took a job in Brine's timber business. In his spare time he campaigned against the false prospectuses offered by colonial emigration agents. His speech at an emigration conference at King's College in London in April 1886 impressed delegates. Shortly afterwards, the government established an Emigration Information Bureau under the Colonial Office. This body was required to provide accurate information on the state of labour markets in all the government's overseas possessions. Having joined the Liberal Party shortly after his return from Australia, Lansbury became first a ward secretary and then general secretary for the Bow and Bromley Liberal and Radical Association. His effective campaigning skills had been noted by leading Liberals, including Samuel Montague, the Liberal MP for Whitechapel, who persuaded the young activist to be his agent in the 1885 general election. Lansbury's handling of this election campaign prompted Montague to urge him to stand for Parliament himself. Lansbury declined this, partly on practical grounds, and partly on principle. He was becoming increasingly convinced that his future lay not as a radical liberal but as a socialist. He continued to serve the Liberals as an agent and local secretary, while expressing his socialism in a short-lived monthly radical journal, Coming Times, which he founded and co-edited with a fellow dissident, William Hoffman. London County Council elections, 1889, Indiana 1888, Lansbury agreed to act as election agent for Jane Cobden, who was contesting the first elections for the newly formed London County Council as Liberal candidate for the Bowen-Bromley division. Cobden, an early supporter of women's suffrage, was the fourth child of the Victorian radical statesman Richard Cobden. The Society for Promoting Women as County Councillors, a new women's rights group, had proposed Cobden as the candidate for Bowen-Bromley and Margaret Sandhurst for Brixton. Lansbury counselled Cobden in the issues of greatest concern to the East End electorate: housing for the poor, ending of sweated labour, rights of public assembly, and control of the police. Specific questions of women's rights were largely avoided during the campaign. On the 19th of January 1889, both women were elected. These triumphs were, however, short-lived. Sandhurst's qualification to serve as a county councillor was successfully challenged in the courts by her Conservative Party opponents on the grounds of her sex, and her subsequent appeal was dismissed. Cobden was not immediately challenged, but in April 1891, after a series of legal actions, she was effectively neutered as a councillor by being prevented from voting on pain of severe financial penalties. Lansbury urged her, during the hearings, to go to prison and let the council back you up by refusing to declare your seat vacant. Cobden did not follow this path. A bill introduced in the House of Commons in May 1891 permitting women to serve as county councillors found little support among MPs of any party. Women were not granted this right until 1907. Lansbury was offended by his party's lukewarm support for women's rights. In a letter published in the Pall Mall Gazette, he made an open call to Bowen-Bromley's Liberals to shake themselves free of party feeling and throw the energy and ability they are now wasting on minor questions into securing the full rights of citizenship to every woman in the land. He was further disillusioned by his party's failure to endorse the 8-hour maximum working day. Lansbury had formed the view, expressed some years later, that liberalism would progress just as far as the great moneybags of capitalism would allow it to progress. By 1892, the Liberals no longer felt like Lansbury's political home. Most of his current associates were avowed socialists: William Morris, Eleanor Marx, John Burns and Henry Mayers Hindman, founder of the Social Democratic Federation. Nevertheless, Lansbury did not resign from the Liberals until he had fulfilled the commitment to act as election agent for John Murray Macdonald, the prospective Liberal candidate for Bowen-Bromley. He saw his candidate victorious in the July 1892 general election as soon as the result was declared. Lansbury resigned from the Liberal Party and joined the SDF. Socialist reformer, Social Democratic Federation. Lansbury's choice of the SDF from several socialist organizations reflected his admiration for Hindman, whom he considered one of the truly great ones. Lansbury quickly became the Federation's most tireless propagandist, traveling throughout Britain to address meetings or to demonstrate solidarity with workers involved in industrial disputes. Around this time, Lansbury temporarily set aside his Christian beliefs and became a member of the East London Ethical Society. One factor in his disillusion with the church was the local clergy's unsympathetic approach to poor relief, and their opposition to collective political action. In 1895, Lansbury fought 2 parliamentary elections for the SDF in Walworth, first a by-election on the 14th of May, then the 1895 general election 2 months later. Despite his energetic campaigning, he was heavily defeated defeated on each occasion, with tiny proportions of the vote. After these dismal results, Lansbury was persuaded by Hindman to give up his job at the sawmill and become the SDF's full-time salaried national organizer. He preached a straightforward revolutionary doctrine. "The time has arrived," he informed an audience at Todmorden in Lancashire, "for the working classes to seize political power and use it to overthrow the competitive system and establish in its place state cooperation." Lansbury's time as SDF national organizer did not last long. In 1896, when Isaac Bryan died suddenly, Lansbury thought that his family duty required him to take charge of the sawmill, and he returned home to Bow. In the general election of 1900, a pact with the Liberals in the Bow and Bromley constituency gave Lansbury, the SDF candidate, a straight fight against the Conservative incumbent William Guthrie. Lansbury's cause was hindered by his public opposition to the Boer War at a time when war fever was strong, while Guthrie, a former soldier, stressed his military credentials. Lansbury lost the election, though his total of 2,258 votes against Guthrie's 4,403 was considered creditable by the press. This campaign was Lansbury's last major effort on behalf of the SDF. He became disenchanted by Hindman's inability to work with other socialist groups, and in about 1903 resigned from the SDF to join the Independent Labour Party. At around this time, Lansbury rediscovered his Christian faith and rejoined the Anglican Church. Poor Law Guardian. In April 1893, Lansbury achieved his first elective office when he became a Poor Law Guardian for the district of Poplar. In place of the traditionally harsh workhouse regime that was the norm, Lansbury proposed a program of reform, whereby the workhouse became an agency of help instead of a place of despair, and the stigma of poverty was removed. Lansbury was one of a minority socialist bloc which was often able, through its energy and commitment, to win support for its plans. Education for the poor was one of Lansbury's major concerns. He helped to transform the Forest Gate District School, previously a punitive establishment run on quasi-military lines, into a proper place of education that became the Poplar Training School, and was still in existence more than half a century later. At the 1897 annual Poor Law Conference, Lansbury summarized his views on poor relief in his first published paper, The Principles of the English Poor Law. His analysis offered a Marxist critique of capitalism. Only the reorganization of industry on collectivist lines would solve contemporary problems. Lansbury added to his public duties when, in 1903, he was elected to Poplar Borough Council. In the summer of that year he met Joseph Fells, a rich American soap manufacturer with a penchant for social projects. Lansbury persuaded Fells in 1904 to purchase a 100-acre farm at Laindon, in Essex, which was converted into a labour colony that provided regular work for Poplars unemployed and destitute. Fells also agreed to finance a much larger colony at Hoseley Bay in Suffolk, to be operated as a government scheme under the local government board. Both projects were initially successful, but were undermined after the election of a Liberal government in 1906. The new local government minister was John Burns, a former SDF stalwart now ensconced in the Liberal Party who had become a firm opponent of socialism. Burns encouraged a campaign of propaganda to discredit the principle of labor colonies, which were presented as money-wasting ventures that pampered idlers and scroungers. A formal inquiry revealed irregularities in the operation of the scheme, though it exonerated Lansbury. He retained the confidence of his electorate and was easily re-elected to the Board of Guardians in 1907. In 1905 Lansbury was appointed to a Royal Commission on the Poor Laws, which deliberated for 4 years. Lansbury, together with Beatrice Webb of the Fabian Society, argued for the complete abolition of the poor laws and the replacement by a system that incorporated old age pensions, a minimum wage, and national and local public works projects. These proposals were embodied at the Commission's conclusion in a minority report signed by Lansbury and Webb. The majority report was, according to Postgate, an ill-considered jumble of suggestions, so preposterously inadequate that no attempts were ever made to implement it. Most of the minority's recommendations in time became national policy. The poor laws were finally abolished by the Local Government Act 1929.